Choice moments. Choice moments. We started a series last week, Choice Moments. We can all go back in different, probably eras of our life where we made a choice. And that choice may have changed everything. If you're married, you made a choice that day. When you said, I do, that was a choice moment. And that the power of a moment is something that people don't realize how it impacts their life, that our life is made up of moments. We talked about this last week, and those moments make our life. Those moments set a trajectory for our life. We choose, and sometimes it's in the midst of simple things that we make what we would term a simple choice, but it really was a choice moment, and it defined maybe our future, our destiny. The power of a moment we talked about. And today I want to talk to you about this idea of the power, the moment of truth. The moment of truth. Sometimes when things unfold and truth is revealed, it can be a scary thing. It can be something that we value. It could be something that we would rather not face, but the power of the truth of the moment, the moment of truth is something like none other. This last week we got to be with family down in Missouri, and I got to be around my great nephews and my great niece. I got to see her for the first time, and my two great nephews, I'm just going to refer to them as my nephews. I have other nephews, but these are my great nephews, and they're playing. They're about 6 months difference in age. One's 2, one's about a year and a half, and they're running around. And what's funny about the year and a half year old is a little bigger than the 2-year-old, but the 2-year-old is much more verbal. And these two are going to be the best of friends and the worst of enemies. You know, they're learning. And it's funny, the older one, his parents really encourage him, use your words. And he's very verbal. He's 2. And so we were watching him, and he goes, cry. And he started crying. And I was like, wow, you called that one out. That's pretty good. You know, mad, you know. Well, we hear the word share. And he goes, share. And he's telling the other one, share. And what share meant to him was different than what they were trying to get to communicate. Because share, and he's taking everything from the other one. And then he's guarding him, you know, from it. And he's going, share. And my niece, she looked at me, she goes, you know, we saw that one playing out a little bit different, how we were teaching him that. We got to go back and reapply that one. The moment of truth was revealed that, yeah, the understanding wasn't quite there. And seeing them go head to head sometimes and seeing them interact, it was quite interesting. Nothing's more powerful than that moment of truth. And probably we all face that in our lives more often than we realize. When you take a test, you know, there's a moment of truth. You know, when the results come out, that moment of truth, I either studied or I didn't, or I studied the wrong thing or the right thing. You know, that moment of truth when we show up to work, there's a moment of truth, how we work. At the end of the day, there's a moment of truth when you send your child off to college. There's a moment of truth this last few weeks and a couple more graduation weekends. And there's that moment of truth. There's that time where you're rewarded for your effort, that moment of truth, or you're not rewarded for the effort you didn't make, that moment of truth. When you say, I do, that moment of truth. When we say, I'll do that, whether we come through or not, there's a moment of truth. When we say, I'll always do this, I'll always do that, there's a moment of truth when it comes time to follow up on our words. Winston Churchill, I came across this quote, I really like it. He said, men occasionally stumble over the truth. He said, but most of them pick themselves up and hurry off as if nothing happened. I think this happens a lot more than probably we would like to recognize or admit, that we come across this moment of truth and we push it off. It's like a choice moment. We might even term it's not that big a deal. And as it plays out, it's probably, you know, just because I push it off this time, it's not going to make that big a deal. It's not that big an issue, when in reality it has created a path. It has created a conduit. It has created a a way that our life is going to go. And it was just this choice moment. Edgar Watson Howe, he's an American novelist. He was a newspaper magazine publicist in late 19th, early 20th century. And he said this. He said, many people would be more truthful were it not for their uncontrollable desire to talk. Just talking. We excuse things away. We hit that moment of truth. We have that choice moment, that opportunity, whatever it is. And that moment of truth arises and we talk it away. We explain it away. It's not that big a deal. And it's up to us to recognize that. But the only way we'll recognize those God moments is in Him and through Him. We're going to look at that. I've been told, always tell the truth. You know, from a little kid, always tell the truth. And as I've grown older, I realize that when you apply that, when you always tell the truth, well, that's the easiest story to remember. You know, when you're replaying things, if you've always told the truth, if you're telling the truth, that's the easiest story to remember. It's where we start getting hooked up in this idea that if we start trying to stretch the truth, if we start trying to misrepresent, well, that's hard to remember. And always tell the truth. Always tell the truth. Truth is not determined by the majority vote. It's not determined by the consensus of opinion. Truth is truth. I have a statement, and we're going to revisit this a couple times today, is truth is revealed when you choose to move with God. Truth is revealed when you choose to move with God, and not only is truth revealed, but nothing can stop you from fulfilling God's purpose for your life. Truth is revealed when you choose, when I choose to move with God. So here's a question. We all have to answer this question is, have you ever felt that you were making right choices? Well, if you said, no, I've never made a right choice, then we have bigger issues than, than what we're dealing with on the forefront here today. But have you ever felt that you were making right choices, that you were moving with God, but everyone around you was holding God up? Now, I want you to think about that. You ever felt like you sensed what God was doing, you sensed what God was saying, you sensed what God was, let's go even further, promising for your life. And you were going to move into that. You were going to go be obedient in that step. You were going to be obedient in following God's will for your life. But it seemed like those closest to you, those around you, were maybe holding God up. They weren't sensing that same thing. They weren't sensing what you were sensing. I can tell you that happens a lot in Scripture. And that happens a lot, I believe, when we're trying to follow the will of God. And that will require faith, and it will require what I believe is a tenacious choice in the moment, that choice moment to follow God. And I think sometimes we go, well, since others aren't coming with me, I'll just push this off. It must just be me. Maybe God was wrong. Maybe I'm not sensing it. You know what? Maybe it's not that big a deal. Maybe I'm just going to... And I think there's people that many times miss what God's wanting to do in them and through them. And it affects everything because truth is being revealed as we follow God. We're going to look at that today. Intentions are huge when it comes into play here. It reveals truth. The character we're going to look at a little bit, his story is Moses. Today, Moses, he had intentions. He'd come to the point, if you don't know about Moses, most people here today would have some semblance of understanding of Moses. But Moses was leading the children of Israel out of Egypt. He led them out, miracle after miracle after miracle, and they're going for the promised land. The promised land was God's promise to his people, the children of Israel, and he's going to fulfill that promise, and you're going to establish yourselves in this land that I give you and your descendants. Moses gets to that point. He's led them through. There's been trials, there's been tribulations, but there's been miracles. And at this point, they come to the realm of the promised land, and Moses has got to send in 12 spies into the promised land. We've got to find out what we're dealing with here. I mean, it was very logical. It was very methodical. It was strategic. We're going to send in the spies. We're going to send in 12 spies. They're going to spy out the land and come back with a report. What's interesting is Moses' intention is to send these spies in to confirm what he knows God has told him, what God has presented in the aspect of the promised land. The report coming back, he's wanting a confirmation. He's wanting an encouraging report. His intention is to send them in and confirm what God has said. And they come back. And it seems that's where the wheels begin to wobble on the cart. That's where things begin to fall apart. Because what they saw, what they experienced was truly what God said it would be, even more so. The promised land was truly the promised land. And they come back with this report that Moses' intention is going to inspire the people, but instead they focus on the negative in this choice moment. I want to read you this portion, Numbers 13, 27 through 28. It gives us the clear picture of the consensus. And they told him, "We came to the land to which you sent us. It flows with milk and honey, and this is its fruit." I want to pause there for a second. They have confirmed the land is everything, more so. It flows with milk and honey. This is an awesome place. Now, you got to remember their journey, what they've come through. They've literally come through the Red Sea. They've come through a desert experience. They've come to the point, they've seen God's hand at work. They have been provided miracle bread, manna. So much so, they're tired of it. God provide us meat, and miraculously, God causes this quail to fly in, and they have meat and literally so much meat, they're tired of meat. And when these spies come back and they show them the fruit of the land, they show them the spoils, they show them what's available. I mean, it's everything they've wanted. It's everything they thought it would be and more. Here it is. The spies have gone, they're bringing back this report, but then it turns, it changes. However, verse 28, the people who dwell in the land are strong, and the cities are fortified and very large. And besides, we saw the descendants of Anak there. We're going to talk about that in a moment. These were giants. People see things differently. Have you ever noticed that? You can see the same thing and people see it differently. What was it? A couple years ago on the internet, it was the dress. Do you see a yellow or do you see blue? And this last week, it was Laurel or Yanny. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll need to look it up. And it's a sound. And they say this word, Laurel, and some people hear it Laurel, and some people hear it Yanny. I was sitting there, and it was a big thing on the internet. If you haven't seen it, how many have seen it or heard it? How many hear Yanny? How many hear Laurel? How many are confused like me, and it may change from time to time? Yeah, okay. I'm sitting there, and it's all it is. If you don't know what this is, they're saying this word, and you either hear Laurel or you hear Yanny. And I can't explain it. I'm sure there's all kinds of people that are saying it. Evidently, they really are saying Laurel, but some people hear it differently. But it's the same thing. It's with our perspective. I was sitting there, Heather and I, we have an overstuffed chair. We usually sit in it in the morning. We're drinking coffee, and she's usually going, shh. I haven't had enough coffee because I get up before. I'm more of a morning person. And so I'm sitting there and I go, and I play it. And I go, "What'd you hear?" And she's like, What? And I'm like, "What'd you hear?" She goes, "Laurel." I go, "No, it's Yanny. How are you hearing that?" And she goes, "What are you talking about?" Like she knows nothing. I go, "Let me play it again." And she goes, "I hear Laurel." And I go, "Wait. I'm hearing Laurel. Hang on. Okay." And then I play it again, and I hear Yanny, and I can't get it to go back to Laurel. And then, so we were in Missouri, and we were talking about this with our family and everything, and I find it, and I play it. And I'm hearing Yanny again, or I'm hearing Laurel. And I'm like, "Oh, I hear Laurel." And I go, "Heather, what do you hear?" And she goes, "I hear Yanny." And I'm like, "This is crazy." And everybody was flip-flopping and just going back and forth. We could see the same thing. We can hear the same thing. And have a different result in the choice moment, in that moment of truth. This is what was happening in this promised land scenario. They're seeing the same thing. They have the same commission by Moses to go and spy out the land, but they've come back with a very different report. Yeah, it's everything we thought it would be. Yes, it's everything that God had promised. However, there's giants in the land. We can't do this. Our perspectives are interesting. I love this story. You maybe have heard it. There was a woman. She was flying. She's a business lady, and she's got quite a layover at the airport. She's been sitting. She thought, well, I'll go buy a book. And so she goes into the bookstore at the airport. She's buying a book, and she sees a bag of cookies there. And so she takes the cookies, and she's like, I'm going to have some cookies. I'll read a book. So she sits back down. A gentleman, he comes and sits next to her, and just waiting for her flight. She's reading the book, and all of a sudden she looks over, and she sees him eating. There's the bag of cookies, and he has opened her bag of cookies, and he's eating a cookie. And she looks at him, and he just smiles at her. And she just reaches down and takes a cookie, and she puts it in her mouth, and she's like, that's weird. He's like eating my cookies. And so she's reading the book, and he reaches down again. He grabs a cookie, he starts eating it, and she looks at him, and he just kind of smiles, and she grabs a cookie and plops it in her mouth, and what in the world? This goes on. It's not a big bag of cookies, but it comes down to there's one cookie left. So one cookie left in the bag, and she thought, is he going to be so audacious that he's going to take this cookie and eat this cookie, the last cookie? And he looks at her, and he smiles, and he reaches down and grabs the cookie and breaks it in half and offers her half. She goes, I snatch it out of his hand, I throw it in my mouth, I get up, and I take my stuff, and I go walk over to my gate, and they call the plane about that time. I get on the plane, I'm so angry, I'm frustrated. I sit down and get all my stuff, the plane takes off, and I'm like, I'm going to read my book. And she gets in her bag, and she grabs her book, and she sees her unopened bag of cookies laying in her bag. And all this time, in her perspective, in her mind, in that choice moment, she thinks he is the rudest guy on the planet, realizing at that point, she was the rudest person on the planet, and he's just simply sharing his cookies with her. Sometimes we get in a situation, and we see it from our perspective, and we are so right, when in reality, we are so wrong. The 12 spies go in. 10 of the 12 see it one way, and 2 of the 12 see it another. 85% of them are completely against going into the promised land, and only 2 of them, Caleb and Joshua, are saying, yeah, this is what we need to do. This is what we got to do. This choice moment, this is going to define the trajectory of our people, the trajectory of our lives. This was God's promise. And I think there's people sitting here today, and God has promised you something. God has placed a calling in your heart. God has placed a path before you. It may be a step. It may be a journey. It may be a process. It could be in the form of a relationship, a covenant. Be careful that in a choice moment you push that off. Be careful that in a choice moment you go, it's probably not that big a deal. I'm going to tell you, a moment of truth is a powerful thing. And the power of a moment could change a life. It could change a destiny. And I believe before us there's moments. Our lives are made up of moments, and it's in those moments that God begins to define us. Be careful that you not push off the things of God, the promises of God, because this story is an illustration for us to learn from, to realize the power of a moment. Promised land, Caleb, he's this one of the spies. He speaks up. Numbers 13:30. It says, Caleb quieted the people before Moses and said, let us go up at once and occupy it, for we are well able to overcome it. He's seeing the same situation that the others saw. No, there's giants. This is, yes, the land flows with milk and honey, but there's giants in that land, and Caleb is going, no. We're well able to do this. It is everything God promised. We're well able to do this. The other 10 men, 85% again of the spies, Numbers 13:31 says, the men who had gone up with him said, we are not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we are. I mean, one's yelling Yanny, one's yelling Yorl, one's yelling it's a yellow dress, one's yelling it's a blue dress, but they're looking at the same thing, right? Bottom line, what the 10 spies saw scared them. I think that choice moment, a God moment, can be scary at times. Because if you see it through your own eyes, through your own power, through your own understanding, this God moment will overwhelm you. This God moment will be beyond you. But in a choice moment that's provided by God, it's not about how strong you are. It's about how mighty He is. Amen? This was the whole situation. And they were scared. And they were determined to give up. I want to give you this statement. In a moment of truth, they would not trust God or their leader Moses to go forward into the promised land. In this moment of truth, they would not trust God nor their leader Moses to go into the promised land. I think there's times in our life where God has blatantly done, for them, He had blatantly done miracle after miracle after miracle to get them where He promised He would take them. And He brought them to a point where there was a choice going to be required. It was a choice that involved faith. It was a choice that involved overcoming their fears through the power of God. And what were they going to do with it? Well, the vast majority of those that went in are saying, no, we can't do this. And only 2 stood up and said, yes, we can. That moment of truth, more fear was sowed into the people. Look at Numbers 13, 32 through 33. Verse 32 says, so they brought to the people of Israel a bad report of the land that they had spied out, saying, the land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, and so we seemed to them. I always was fascinated by how the Bible portrays this, because they declare how they see themselves, and because of how they see themselves, that's just obviously how these giants see them. It's how our perspective is. Well, since we see ourselves as not able, they're going to see us as not able, therefore we can't do this. I mean, that's just how the enemy would love you to see your life. I can't do this because I'm not able to do this. And God says, oh, you haven't included me into that equation. If this is my calling, if this is that moment that I've created for you that's going to cause a trajectory difference for your life, a destiny difference for your life, then I'm going to empower you in that. You haven't put me in the equation. You got to put me into the equation. Think about it. What would have happened? Contrary thinking here, what would have happened to the credibility of the 10 spies had the children of Israel said, no, we're going to go with the 2. We're going to go with the ones that just simply want to accept what God has promised. And we're going to go do that. I mean, that would have changed the whole storyline. That would have changed the whole trajectory. That would have changed 40 plus years of wandering in the wilderness for the children of Israel. That would have changed drastically. It would have changed generations. Initially, they chose to reject Caleb's affirmation of God's command and promise. They even instigated a rebellion. You'll have to go back and read the details on this, against Moses, and begin to choose another leader who would take them back to Egypt. See, when people come up to a God moment, I truly believe this. When people come up to a God moment, there is a choice required. I believe that when the gospel is presented, there's a response that's necessary. Whenever the truth of the word is presented to people, there's a response. There's either, I'm not going to do anything about it, or I'm going to do something, or I'm going to apply it. At this point, there is a response that's necessary for the children of Israel. And it's at this point, they said, no, we want a new leader. We want a new leader. Matter of fact, we want somebody to lead us back to what we know. Even though it was horrible, it seems better than what we don't know. Careful, church, that you not find yourself constantly coming to choice moments that God presents that requires faith, and you lean back onto what you know. You lean back on what's comfortable. See, faith takes us out of our comfort zone. We've heard this. If you've been around church for any amount of time, you know that faith is uncomfortable. Faith doesn't just go, oh, I'm glad to be having faith today. It just doesn't work that way. But another way to say it is, you know what? I'm glad I can trust the Lord no matter what. I'm glad that regardless of this moment, God's going to get me through. Lord, what would you have me do? God, what is your plan? What is your will? Well, revisit his promise. What has he said to you? I said early on, God has promised something to you. Maybe God has placed a calling in your heart. God has placed a path before you, a journey. Well, what is it? And if he did that, then he's going to get you not only to that, but he's going to get you through it. He's going to get you to that point where that promise is fulfilled. It's the same thing that's happening in this story. It's very applicable to our lives today. In one moment of truth, 40 years would be the cost for them to turn away from the promise of God because they said no. Because they said no at that choice moment, they had to wander in the wilderness for 40 years. A generation had to die away. It wasn't that the promise was, you could use a wordplay here, denied. It was delayed. It was, okay, you don't want it? All right, I'm going to wait till there is a people that does want it, that does trust me. And that's exactly what happened. And a whole generation had to die off. Only Joshua and Caleb would live to see the promise fulfilled. I want to take you to what I believe is a real key lesson here that we've got to lean into. Caleb was 85 years old. 85 years old. And along with his friend and partner on the journey, Joshua, we come to a point, they have said no to the promised land on the front end with Moses as the leader. Moses has died. They've been in the wilderness. A new leader is chosen. It's Joshua. He was one of the 12. Joshua is the new leader. He's going to take them into the promised land. Some 40 years has gone by now. And Caleb is standing here going, all right, new leader, Joshua, my buddy, we were spies together here. I'm 85 years old now. He's 85 years old. I mean, the excuse to say I'm too old to do what God's called me to. It's been too long. You know, that was back then, and maybe it was a choice moment then, but I just, and it seems like it's come back around, but I just, I'm too old. Lean into Caleb's response. Lean into Caleb's passion about this. It had been a little over 45 years, and Caleb's reminding Joshua about the moment of truth because Joshua, the new leader, is divvying out the land. How it's going to go down, who's going to take what, because we're going to go in and we're going to take this land and we're going to take the promise that God's already given us. And it's as though Caleb's speaking up, telling Joshua 14, 7 through 10, Caleb saying, I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to spy out the land, and I brought him word again as it was in my heart. But my brothers who went up with me made the heart of the people melt. Yet I wholly followed the Lord my God. And Moses swore on that day, saying, surely the land on which your foot has trodden shall be an inheritance for you and your children forever, because you have wholly followed the Lord your God. And now, behold, the Lord has kept me alive, just as he said, these 45 years since the time that the Lord spoke this word to Moses, while Israel walked in the wilderness. And now, behold, I am this day 85 years old. I want to take you back to that original statement I gave you. Truth is revealed when you choose to move with God. Truth is revealed when you choose to move with God, because nothing can stop you from fulfilling God's purpose for your life. Caleb chose to move with God. And though it had to be delayed because of the system, the people that were around him, God still came through on the promise. God was still faithful on the promise. God still blessed him. Caleb spoke, Joshua 14, 11 through 12. He says, I'm still as strong today as I was in the day that Moses sent me. My strength now is as my strength was then, for war and for going and coming. He's saying I could fight and I could still have a productive life. It's interesting. He says, so now give me this hill country of which the Lord spoke on that day. He didn't say, give me some flat land. Give me something that's easy to walk. No, give me the hill country. For you heard on that day how the Anakim were there with great fortified cities. It may be that the Lord will be with me, and I shall drive them out, just as the Lord said. I mean, Caleb was saying, yeah, I've waited 45 years for this moment of truth, and now I'm ready to fight for it. Nobody's going to hold me back now. We're going for this. It was as if Caleb was warning Joshua. If you read the context of all this, don't you dare consider giving me some tranquil piece of settled property. I want what was promised to me. I want what I stood on. I want the promise of God. And in this choice moment, nothing less will do. I think there's a bunch of Christians that need to stand up and say nothing less than God's promise will do. It's not about going, well, good enough. No, I want God's promise. So what has he promised you? Well, that's what you go after. That's that choice moment. That's that moment of truth. In closing, this passage of Scripture concludes Joshua 14, 13 through 14. It says, then Joshua blessed him. It didn't say Joshua argued with him. It didn't say Joshua went, well, you are old, I'm old. Maybe we'll just kind of fade off, let this new generation come in. No, Joshua blessed him and gave him Hebron to Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, for an inheritance. Therefore, Hebron became the inheritance of Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, to this day, because he wholly followed the Lord, the God of Israel. What you've got to see here is even though the promise was delayed, Caleb still wholly followed God. You may have a promise that's delayed because you have followed God, but those around you, maybe closest to you, haven't. You can still wholly follow God, and God can still come through on his promise. You say, but I want him to come through on it today. Okay. You've got to trust God in his timing. You've got to trust God in his provision. You've got to trust him that he's not just working in your life, but he's working in the lives around you. And the light that you shine is not just for your own life and your own path, but it's those that are watching. And that's a moment of truth. That's a moment of truth. In your moment of truth, what will you choose? Wilderness or a promise? A wilderness or a promise? I'm going to ask you to stand, if you would, with me. Here's a question that probably needs to be answered. Is have you quit? Have you quit? Have you just thrown your hands up? Have you just said, what's the use? On a promise that God has made to you. On a promise, on something that God has put in your heart. I'm not talking about a feeling. I'm not talking about just some happy idea. A promise of God. And on that promise, have you quit? I mean, you may be here and you're going, man, this got tough. This got hard. So I'm going to push back. What's interesting is the same battles that Israel shied away from 40, 45 years later, they're having to engage in those same battles. Because the promised land was still there. It wasn't like putting it off saved them from a fight. It wasn't like putting it off saved them from this challenge. Sometimes if I'm going to step up, if I'm going to receive the promise of God, I'm going to have to do what I can do. Right. And then God will fulfill what only he can do. I can't help but think that some of you need to hear that today. Because you're trying to do it in your own strength, and you're hitting this wall, you're hitting this area where it's like, what's the use? I can't do this. You're right, you can't do it. But if God's promised this to you, his way, his will, then he will make up for what you can't do. Galatians 5:7, Apostle Paul, talking, he says, you were running well. He said, who hindered you from obeying the truth? I mean, in moments of truth, there's things that God does for you so that there's an opportunity for God to do things in you and through you. I think we see in this story, that's exactly what happened. That what you got to understand, the situation of the promised land never changed. It just got held back until there was a generation ready to go forward, to go, yeah, we want the promises of God. We want the promised land. And it just so happened that the new leader at that time was one of the 12, who happened to be part of the minority of the 12 that said, hey, we can do this. We can do this. But the delay was 40, 45 years. His opinion and Caleb's opinion hadn't changed. It's still the promise. It's still what God wants. It's still what God... And they went in and they received it. You may be here, and maybe there is a delay. Maybe you relate with Caleb. You've wholly followed God, but there's a delay. Hang in there. Hang in there. God's promise is still true. God's promise is still awesome. It's more than you could ever hope or imagine. Ephesians 3 says it's more than we could ever hope or imagine, exceedingly more. It's beyond what we can measure. It's beyond. This was a land flowing with milk and honey. It was exceedingly well, and it was everything God had promised and more. But because of a choice moment, because of a decision, it had to be delayed. You may be in that. You relate with Caleb. You relate with Joshua. Can I tell you, hold on. You'll get what God has promised, but you got to wholly follow Him. It's not like you go into this retirement mode and you're just, well, I'll just give up. No, I think if we could join in on some of those conversations, we don't have it in Scripture. I think Caleb and Joshua were constantly talking to a new generation going, I'm telling you, the promised land is awesome. One of these days, we're going to go. One of these days, we're going to get back there. One of these days, we completely disagreed with the other 10, but one of these days, we're going to get it. You got to trust me on this. And I think these little girls, little boys were growing up in this going, yeah, that's what I want. Why didn't we do that? What? And all of a sudden, finally, there was this dying off, and there was a generation go, well, there it is. It's worth fighting for. Listen, don't miss your choice moment. Don't miss the opportunity to have God define your destiny and the trajectory of your life, the power, the moment of truth. And for some of you, that may be today. You've been doing it your own way. You've been doing it under your own opinion because that's what you've heard. It can't be anything different. That's what you saw. It can't be anything different. And all the while, you're the one. You're the one with the unopened bag of cookies. You're the one. You're not seeing it. You're not understanding the big picture of it. And you're missing this choice moment. Oh, God forbid that you miss what He has for you to the full extent of what He has for you because you're so into your perspective. You're so into your mindset. You're so into your hurt, your situation, your idea that it couldn't be any other way. Careful.